If anything bigger were to become...
So, what is up, Doc?
Okay. Do you not talk? Oh. Alright. Is that supposed to be you? Okay. What do you... Go.
Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are diving into one of the most unexpected and entertaining movies of 2026, Coyote vs. Acme. This live-action and animated comedy brings the legendary world of Looney Tunes into the real world and finally asks a question fans have been waiting decades to see answered. What would happen if Wile E. Coyote stopped chasing the Roadrunner and decided to take Acme Corporation to court? After years of explosions, failed inventions, broken traps, rockets, tunnels, and countless painful accidents, Wile E. Coyote has finally had enough. Instead of accepting another defeat, he decides to fight back and hires a human lawyer, Kevin Avery, played by Will Forte, to take on the powerful Acme Corporation. But what begins as a simple lawsuit soon becomes a much bigger mystery involving corporate secrets, hidden experiments, unexpected witnesses, and a shocking conspiracy. In this video, we will explain the complete story of Coyote vs. Acme from beginning to end, going through the major events, characters, courtroom battles, surprises, emotional moments, and the final conclusion. We will also review the movie, discuss what works and what does not, and explore its deeper message about friendship, determination, justice, and never giving up. So, sit back, relax, and let's get started with the full story of Coyote vs. Acme. The story of Coyote vs. Acme begins in a world that looks almost like our own, except for one very important difference: humans are not the only people living in it. Cartoon characters exist alongside ordinary human beings, walking through the same streets, entering the same businesses, dealing with the same laws and, in many cases, suffering the same problems. In this strange but fascinating world, the Looney Tunes characters are not simply characters from television. They are living beings with their own personalities, relationships, jobs, ambitions, and problems. And among all of them, there is perhaps no character who has experienced more physical suffering than Wile E. Coyote. For years, Wile E. has devoted almost his entire existence to one goal: catching the Roadrunner. He has chased that incredibly fast bird across deserts, highways, mountains, cliffs, and countless dangerous landscapes. But there has always been one thing standing between Wile E. and success: his own collection of Acme products. Every time he thinks he has finally discovered the perfect invention, the product turns against him. Rockets explode too early, traps fail at exactly the wrong moment, explosives send him flying through the air, magnets create disasters, tunnels lead nowhere, and elaborate machines designed to capture the Roadrunner somehow end up destroying Wile E. instead. At first, these failures seem like nothing more than classic cartoon comedy. But this time, the story asks us to look at those failures from Wile E.'s point of view. What if all those accidents were not simply bad luck? What if the products he trusted were actually defective? And what if the company responsible could legally be held accountable? Before the main story reaches the present day, the movie gives us a mysterious glimpse into the past. In 1992, inside the world of Acme Corporation, a scientist named Dr. Peter Law discovers something deeply disturbing. Law is not an ordinary employee. He is involved in product development and understands exactly how Acme's inventions are designed, tested, and released. During his work, he discovers information connected to something called Project Sisyphus. The name itself sounds strange, but what Law uncovers is much more serious. Acme has been using cartoon characters as test subjects for its products. Because cartoon characters can survive injuries that would destroy an ordinary human being, Acme has treated their suffering as a convenient testing environment. Products can be dropped on them, exploded around them, launched at them, and tested under extreme circumstances, allowing the company to learn how its inventions behave before selling them to human customers. The more Law learns, the more uncomfortable he becomes. What Acme executives see as useful product testing, Law sees as an unethical experiment that has been deliberately hidden from the public. He realizes that the endless suffering of characters like Coyote may not have been accidental at all. There could be a system behind it. Terrified by what he has discovered, Dr. Law attempts to send a warning to someone outside the company. He secretly records a message containing information about Project Sisyphus and sends it toward an unknown contact. But before he can expose the truth, Acme finds him. Law is captured and imprisoned inside one of Acme's own portable holes, a bizarre cartoon device that allows someone to disappear into an impossible space. The scene immediately establishes that Acme is much more powerful than it appears. This is not simply a company selling ridiculous products. There are people inside the organization who are willing to silence anyone who threatens to expose its secrets. Law's disappearance becomes one of the biggest mysteries surrounding Acme, and for years his warning remains buried. The story then jumps forward to the present day, where Coyote is still doing what he has always done, chasing the Roadrunner. But something has changed. Wile is tired. He has spent years being blown apart, crushed, thrown off cliffs, flattened, shocked, launched into the sky, and humiliated by his own inventions. He has endured injury after injury, yet he always gets back up and tries again. His determination has always been one of his defining characteristics, but now that determination has reached a breaking point. One day, while watching television, he sees an advertisement for a law firm called Avery, Jones and Maltese. The firm specializes in personal injury cases involving cartoon violence and, more importantly, cases involving Acme products. For perhaps the first time, he realizes that there may be another way to deal with his problem. Instead of buying another Acme invention and hoping that this one finally works, he can take Acme to court. He makes his way to the law office and meets Kevin Avery, a human lawyer who has become known for taking unusual injury cases. Kevin is not exactly the most successful or intimidating attorney in Albuquerque. His law practice is modest, and his career has not turned him into a famous courtroom superstar. But he understands the law, and more importantly, he understands that cartoon characters can be victims too. He presents his case by showing Kevin the long history of Acme products that have caused him harm. The evidence is almost unbelievable because the injuries are so absurd. There are explosives, rockets, traps, mechanical devices, dangerous gadgets, and countless other inventions. Yet when Kevin begins looking at the situation seriously, he realizes that there may actually be a legitimate legal argument. He has repeatedly purchased products from the same corporation, trusted those products to perform as advertised, and suffered serious consequences when they failed. The fact that the injuries look ridiculous does not necessarily mean they are legally meaningless. Kevin's niece, Paige, who is working at the firm as an intern, becomes particularly interested in the case. Unlike Kevin, Paige immediately sees the potential. She believes that Wiley could have a strong case against Acme, especially if the company has been knowingly selling defective products. She is young, energetic, ambitious, and much more willing to challenge powerful corporations than Kevin initially is. Kevin, however, is cautious. He understands how difficult it would be to fight a corporation as large and influential as Acme. A courtroom battle could destroy his small law firm if they lose. Acme has money, powerful attorneys, corporate influence, and a huge amount of information that Kevin does not have. So instead of immediately preparing for a dramatic trial, Kevin considers settling the case. Acme's lawyer Buddy Crane soon enters the picture. Buddy is confident, polished, charming, and extremely dangerous in the courtroom. He represents the corporation with the kind of effortless confidence that suggests he has won many battles before. Rather than allowing the case to become a public trial, Buddy offers Wiley a settlement. From Acme's perspective, this is the ideal solution. Pay the Coyote enough money to make the problem disappear, force him to sign an agreement, and prevent anyone from digging into the company's history. Kevin is tempted by the offer because accepting it would protect his firm and guarantee Wiley compensation, but Paige believes they should keep fighting. and Wally himself refuses to accept the settlement. For him, this is no longer just about money. He wants justice. He wants Acme to acknowledge what it has done to him. The refusal changes everything. The case will now go to trial. Kevin knows that they are taking on an enormous opponent, but Wally's determination begins to affect him. There is something almost inspirational about the Coyote's refusal to quit. He has failed thousands of times, but he still gets back up. Kevin begins preparing the case, while Paige searches for evidence that can prove Acme's products were not simply unfortunate accidents. One of the most obvious witnesses would be the Roadrunner himself. After all, the Roadrunner has witnessed many of Wally's attempts and has seen the Acme products fail again and again. If he could testify, his testimony might establish a pattern of defective products. But there is one enormous problem. The Roadrunner does not want to be found. The legal team attempts to subpoena him, but locating the Roadrunner proves almost impossible. Every time they think they have him cornered, he disappears at incredible speed. His refusal to cooperate becomes another source of frustration. From Kevin's perspective, the case is already becoming more complicated than he expected. They need witnesses, evidence, corporate records, and some way to prove that Acme knew its products were dangerous. Meanwhile, Acme is not sitting still. Inside the corporation, executives realize that the lawsuit could expose information they have spent years protecting. Foghorn Leghorn, one of the company's senior figures, becomes particularly concerned. He understands that if Kevin and Paige discover the truth about Acme's internal operations, the consequences could be catastrophic. Buddy Crane is therefore given a clear objective: prevent the lawsuit from uncovering Acme's secrets. The legal battle is no longer simply Wile E. Coyote versus a corporation. It has become a fight between a small law firm representing one determined cartoon character and a massive organization determined to protect its reputation. Kevin initially believes the case is about defective merchandise, but as the first courtroom proceedings begin, he starts realizing that something much bigger may be hidden behind Wile E's endless series of accidents. The opening courtroom session does not go well for Kevin. Acme's legal team is prepared for every argument, and Buddy knows exactly how to make Wile E's history work against him. From the corporation's perspective, Wile E is not an innocent victim. He is an obsessed predator who repeatedly purchased dangerous products for the sole purpose of catching another creature. Buddy can therefore suggest that Wile E knowingly placed himself in dangerous situations. The courtroom becomes a battle over responsibility. Was Acme responsible for Wile E's injuries? Or was Wile E responsible because he repeatedly used the products in? Then something unexpected happens. Kevin receives information from an anonymous whistleblower. The message does not provide everything, but it points him toward a former Acme employee who may know the truth. The name is Daffy Duck. Kevin and Paige are surprised when they learn that Duffy once worked with Acme and may have information about an old project connected to Dr. Peter Law. The mystery surrounding Law's disappearance suddenly becomes relevant to the lawsuit. When Kevin finally meets Daffy, the eccentric Duck reveals that Dr. Law had tried to send a warning back in 1992. The warning mentioned something called Project Sisyphus. Kevin does not immediately understand the significance of the name, but he begins connecting the pieces. Why would a respected Acme scientist secretly send a warning? Why was he subsequently captured? Why is Acme so desperate to keep the old project hidden? And most importantly, what does Project Sisyphus have to do with Wile E. Coyote? Wile E., however, interprets the situation differently. For him, the discovery of a secret project does not frighten him. Instead, it strengthens his belief that they can win. He compares the lawsuit to his endless attempts to catch the Roadrunner. Every time he has failed, he has tried again. He believes Kevin can do the same thing. They may lose a courtroom battle today, but that does not mean they have to lose tomorrow. Wally's confidence begins restoring Kevin's courage. Yet Kevin is still unaware of one important truth about his client. Wally's desire for justice is genuine, but it is not the only reason he wants the case to continue. Deep inside, he still has the same obsession he has had for years. He wants the Roadrunner. And eventually, Kevin realizes that Wile E may have another plan for the courtroom one. That has nothing to do with justice and everything to do with finally catching his lifelong rival. At the same time, Paige continues investigating Dr. Law. Her search leads her to Law's wife, Granny. Granny reveals that Law had been involved in Acme product development before he disappeared. She remembers how deeply troubled he became during the final period of his work. She also reveals something even more disturbing. Acme has turned Tweety into one of its weapons. The innocent-looking yellow bird is not simply a beloved cartoon character anymore. Acme has trained and used Tweety as a mercenary, sending him after people who become threats to the corporation. Now Paige realizes that the danger is much greater than she thought. They are not just challenging a powerful company in court. They are challenging an organization that has access to cartoon characters with extraordinary abilities and is willing to use them to protect its secrets. The anonymous whistleblower eventually reveals himself to be someone Kevin never expected. Bugs Bunny. Bugs explains that Project Sisyphus was once an Acme testing program, overseen by Dr. Law. The purpose of the project was horrifyingly simple. Acme wanted to use the unique durability of cartoon characters to test products under extreme conditions before releasing those products to human customers. Cartoon characters could survive explosions, falls, crushing impacts, and other forms of violence that would be impossible for humans to endure. Acme therefore treated their suffering as a resource for Kevin. This changes the entire case. Wile E. Coyote may not simply be an unlucky customer. He may have been one of Acme's most frequently used test subjects without ever knowing it. And suddenly, every explosion, every failed trap, every rocket launch, every falling boulder, and every painful accident takes on a completely different meaning. What once looked like random cartoon comedy may actually be evidence of a hidden corporate experiment. Kevin now has a chance to expose Acme, but to do it, he must survive a courtroom battle against Buddy Crane, uncover the truth about Project Sisyphus, and convince a judge that what happened to Wile E. Coyote was not simply another joke in the endless chase between a coyote and a roadrunner. The real fight is only beginning. After learning about Project Sisyphus, Kevin Avery realizes that the case has changed completely. What started as a seemingly ridiculous lawsuit filed by Wile E. Coyote against Acme Corporation is now turning into a serious investigation into one of the company's darkest secrets. Kevin had originally believed that his client was simply a cartoon character who had suffered years of injuries because Acme products repeatedly failed, but Bugs Bunny's revelation forces him to look at Wile E's entire history from a different perspective. If Acme had been using cartoon characters as test subjects, then every explosion and every failed invention could potentially be connected to a secret corporate program. The problem is that knowing something is true and proving it in court are two completely different things. Kevin needs documents, witnesses, records, and someone from inside Acme who is willing to confirm what happened. Without hard evidence, Buddy Crane can easily dismiss the entire story as nothing more than a conspiracy invented by a group of cartoons trying to get money from a successful corporation. Paige becomes even more determined than before. She starts going through every piece of information connected to Dr. Peter Law and Project Sisyphus. She studies old Acme records and tries to understand why Law disappeared in 1992. The more she investigates, the clearer it becomes that Law had been an important scientist within Acme. He was involved in developing and testing products before they were released to customers, meaning he would have had direct knowledge of how the company conducted its experiments. Paige also begins to understand why Law might have become frightened. If Acme had been using cartoon characters as living test subjects, then the company had a reason to keep the program secret. The public might accept a strange malfunctioning gadget as a joke, but discovering that an enormous corporation intentionally exposed living beings to dangerous experiments would be an entirely different matter. Meanwhile, Kevin struggles with the pressure of the case. His law firm is small, and Acme has almost unlimited resources. Every time Kevin thinks he has found a way forward, Buddy Crane seems to have an answer waiting for him. Buddy's strategy is simple: make the lawsuit look absurd. He wants the judge and the public to see Wile E as a reckless cartoon who repeatedly purchased dangerous products because he was obsessed with catching the roadrunner. If Kevin cannot demonstrate that Acme knowingly sold defective products or deliberately concealed dangerous testing practices, then the entire lawsuit could collapse. Kevin therefore understands that Project Sisyphus must become the center of the case if he can prove the project existed and establish a connection between the project and Acme's products. Wall-E's years of suffering could suddenly become evidence rather than comedy. Wall-E, however, is not particularly interested in the complicated legal strategy. He remains focused on the Roadrunner, even though he has agreed to take Acme to court. The old obsession still controls much of his thinking. Kevin notices that whenever the Roadrunner is mentioned, Wall-E becomes excited. Wall-E has spent so many years believing that catching the bird will finally make his life complete, that he cannot easily imagine a future without the chase. Kevin starts questioning whether Wall-E really wants justice or whether the lawsuit is simply another elaborate attempt to get closer to his lifelong rival. At first, Kevin tries to ignore his doubts because he has begun to respect Wall-E's determination. But as the investigation develops, he realizes that the emotional relationship between Wall-E and the Roadrunner may become one of the most important parts of the case. The team also learns more about Acme's internal hierarchy. Foghorn Leghorn, a powerful executive within the company, is deeply concerned about the lawsuit. Foghorn understands that Project Sisyphus could destroy Acme if the truth becomes public. He therefore orders Buddy to make sure the case does not reach the company's confidential records. Buddy assures him that he can handle Kevin, but Foghorn knows that the danger is unpredictable. Kevin may be inexperienced compared with Acme's attorneys, but he has something that corporate lawyers cannot easily control. Wile E. Coyote's stubborn refusal to give up. Every time Acme thinks it has pushed the lawsuit toward failure, Wile E. finds another reason to continue. Foghorn also has another weapon available to him. Acme has been using Tweety as a mercenary, and Paige becomes increasingly worried about what that means. Tweety's appearance is harmless, almost cute, and completely misleading. Behind the innocent image is a character capable of carrying out Acme's orders. Paige begins to realize that the corporation's willingness to use cartoon characters as weapons shows how little regard its leadership has for the well-being of those characters. Project Sisyphus was not an isolated mistake committed by one scientist. It appears to be part of a broader corporate culture in which cartoon characters are treated as tools rather than people. As Kevin and Paige continue investigating, they return to the information provided by Bugs Bunny. Bugs explains that Dr. Law was one of the few people inside Acme who questioned the ethics of Project Sisyphus. Law reportedly believed that cartoon characters were still living beings and should not be subjected to dangerous experiments simply because they could survive them. But Acme executives disagreed. From their perspective, cartoon physics made the characters uniquely useful. If a human tester was injured by a rocket or explosive, the consequences could be catastrophic. A cartoon character, however, could be flattened by the explosion and return to normal moments later. Acme saw this as an advantage. Law saw it as exploitation. The name Project Sisyphus begins to make more sense as Kevin studies the available information. The project was designed around repetition. A product would be tested again and again, with cartoon subjects repeatedly exposed to the same dangerous conditions. The company could modify the product, test it again, collect data, and repeat the process. The cycle could continue endlessly because the test subjects were considered unusually resilient. Wall-E's entire history suddenly resembles this process. He buys a product, uses it to catch the Roadrunner, gets injured, recovers, buys another product, and repeats the same cycle. From a distance, it looks like obsession, but from Acme's perspective, that endless repetition may have been extremely valuable. Kevin is disturbed by the possibility that Wile E. has unknowingly participated in Acme's testing program for years. He begins asking himself whether the company deliberately designed products in ways that would fail under cartoon conditions. If that is true, then Wile E. was not merely unlucky, he was part of a system. The question becomes whether Acme knew exactly what was happening, and whether its executives deliberately allowed it to continue. The investigation leads Kevin and Paige toward the people who might have witnessed Project Sisyphus firsthand. Unfortunately, most of the employees connected to the program are unwilling to talk. Some are frightened of Acme, others deny knowing anything. A few refuse even to meet with Kevin. The company has created an atmosphere in which people understand that speaking out could cost them their jobs or worse. This makes Bugs Bunny's decision to become a whistleblower even more important. Bugs is taking a major risk by exposing the corporation, and Kevin realizes that he cannot waste the opportunity. Eventually, the team develops a courtroom strategy. Kevin decides that instead of trying to prove every single defective Acme product individually, he will establish a larger pattern. He wants to demonstrate that Acme created products under a secret testing program that deliberately involved cartoon violence. If he can prove that, then while his injuries become part of a much larger story, the case could shift from a personal injury lawsuit into a corporate accountability case. To make that happen, Kevin needs someone from Acme to testify under oath. The obvious target is the company's head of public relations. The Tasmanian Devil, a character, has a reputation for being aggressive and unpredictable, but he also has knowledge of how Acme presents itself to the public. Kevin believes that if he asks the right questions, he might force Tasmanian Devil to acknowledge the existence of Project Sisyphus. Bugs suggests that the witness could be vulnerable if Kevin approaches the subject carefully. Kevin therefore prepares a series of questions designed to establish the connection between Acme's public product testing and its secret cartoon testing. The courtroom session begins with enormous pressure on both sides. Kevin knows that this could be his best opportunity to expose Acme. Page watches closely, prepared to provide documents and information whenever necessary, while he sits nearby, seemingly focused on the proceedings. Although his eyes continue scanning the courtroom for the Roadrunner, Buddy Crane appears completely calm. He has clearly anticipated Kevin's strategy and has prepared his own response. Kevin begins questioning the Tasmanian Devil about Acme's product development history. At first, the answers are vague. The witness talks about innovation, safety, quality control, and customer satisfaction. Kevin refuses to be distracted. He starts asking about older testing programs and specific scientists who worked for the company. When he mentions Dr. Peter Law, the atmosphere in the courtroom changes. Acme's attorneys immediately object, but he argues that Kevin is bringing irrelevant information into the case. The judge allows some questioning but warns Kevin not to turn the trial into a speculative investigation. Kevin continues. He asks whether Law was involved in testing products on cartoon characters. The witness becomes visibly uncomfortable. Kevin then mentions Project Sisyphus. For a brief moment, the courtroom falls silent. That moment seems like a victory, but Buddy is ready. He challenges the question, arguing that Kevin has no authenticated document proving that such a project existed. The judge sustains the objection. Kevin tries again from another direction. He asks about Acme's relationship with cartoon characters and whether certain products were designed specifically to withstand cartoon physics. The defense again objects. The questioning becomes increasingly difficult. Every time Kevin approaches the truth, Buddy finds a legal reason to stop him. The judge grows frustrated with the repeated objections and begins questioning whether Kevin has enough evidence to continue. Page realizes what is happening. Acme is not merely defending itself. Its lawyers are deliberately preventing Kevin from putting Project Sisyphus into the official record. The corporation knows that once the project becomes part of a legal transcript, journalists and investigators can begin examining it. Acme therefore needs the judge to dismiss the case before Kevin can establish a clear connection. Kevin refuses to back down. He attempts to introduce evidence from Bugs Bunny and the old information connected to Dr. Law, but without Law himself available to authenticate the information. The defense attacks the evidence as hearsay, but he argues that Kevin is asking the court to accept a story based on rumors, anonymous sources, and the statements of cartoon characters, with obvious personal interests in the outcome. The judge eventually reaches a decision because Kevin cannot establish sufficient admissible evidence connecting while his injuries to a deliberate Acme conspiracy. The case is dismissed. For Kevin and Paige, it is devastating. While he watches the decision in silence, after everything he has endured, after finally deciding to fight back, it appears that Acme has won. Outside the courthouse, reporters begin surrounding the lawyers. Kevin is frustrated and embarrassed. He believes he has failed his client, but then he makes a decision that changes the direction of the entire story. Even though the court has dismissed the lawsuit, Kevin still believes Project Sisyphus is real. He also believes that the public deserves to know what Acme has been doing. So instead of quietly accepting defeat, Kevin speaks to the press. He explains what they discovered about Dr. Law, Project Sisyphus, and the possibility that Acme used cartoon characters as test subjects. He does not have every piece of evidence, but he describes the pattern he has uncovered. The story immediately attracts attention. News organizations begin investigating. Acme, cartoon characters who have suffered from Acme products begin talking publicly about their experiences. The dismissal of Wiley's lawsuit unexpectedly gives the story even more publicity because people become curious about why a powerful corporation would fight so aggressively to keep a strange testing program hidden. The pressure on Acme increases rapidly. What Kevin could not accomplish in court, public attention begins accomplishing outside the courtroom. Government officials start asking questions. Eventually, the controversy reaches Washington, D.C., where lawmakers decide that the allegations are serious enough to warrant a congressional hearing. For Kevin, this is an unexpected second chance. He may have lost the lawsuit, but he has created something much bigger. Project Sisyphus is now being discussed publicly, and Acme can no longer simply dismiss the allegations as the complaints of one angry coyote. When Kevin tells Wiley about the congressional hearing, Wiley immediately asks one question: will the Roadrunner be there? Kevin hesitates. He knows exactly what Wiley is thinking. Even after everything that has happened, Wiley still wants to catch the Roadrunner, and the next stage of their journey will take them far beyond Albuquerque, into the heart of Washington, where the truth about Acme may finally come out. The decision to hold a congressional hearing changes the entire situation. For Kevin Avery, Page, Wiley Coyote, and Acme Corporation, what began as one cartoon character's personal lawsuit has now become a national controversy. Reporters are talking about Project Sisyphus. Cartoon characters are beginning to question Acme's practices, and government officials are demanding answers. For Kevin, the hearing represents something even more important, a second opportunity to expose the truth. He had failed inside the courtroom because Buddy Crane's legal team had successfully blocked his evidence. But Congress operates differently. The hearing could allow witnesses to speak publicly, documents to be examined, and Acme executives to answer questions in front of the entire country. Kevin knows that this could be the moment when everything finally comes together. But there is one problem that immediately becomes obvious when he speaks with Wiley Coyote. Wiley is not particularly interested in Congress, justice, corporate responsibility, or even Project Sisyphus. His first question is whether the Roadrunner will be present at the hearing. Kevin realizes that after everything they have experienced, Wiley's obsession with the Roadrunner has not disappeared. In fact, it may be stronger than ever. Kevin tries to explain that the hearing is extremely serious. If they are going to Washington, they need to focus on Acme and the evidence against the company. They cannot treat the hearing like another opportunity to set a trap for the Roadrunner. Wiley, however, sees the situation differently. To him, the Roadrunner has always been the center of his life. Every invention he purchased, every trap he built, every dangerous plan he attempted, and every injury he suffered was connected to one goal. Catching the Roadrunner was not simply a hobby. It had become the reason Wiley kept getting back up after every failure. Kevin understands that Wiley's determination is part of what made him admire his client, but he is beginning to realize that this determination may also be Wiley's greatest weakness. Still, Kevin needs Wiley to participate in the hearing, and eventually he tells him that the Roadrunner is expected to be there. The statement is enough to convince Wiley to make the journey. Page joins them, and the three begin preparing for Washington. Their trip becomes an important period for Kevin and Wiley because they are no longer simply lawyer and client. They have developed a strange friendship through the case. Kevin has seen Wiley at his lowest moments, watched him endure humiliation, and witnessed his refusal to give up. Wiley, meanwhile, has seen Kevin struggle with his own insecurities. Kevin is not a famous attorney with a massive legal empire. He is a man trying to save his small practice and prove that he is capable of standing against a corporation far more powerful than himself. In many ways, Kevin and Wiley are similar. Both have experienced repeated failures, and both are trying to prove that Failure does not have to be the end of the story. As they prepare their evidence, Paige discovers more information about Acme's history. The company has spent years presenting itself as an innovative organization that creates products for everyone. Its advertisements emphasize convenience, excitement, and technological advancement. But behind that polished image is a history of accidents involving cartoon customers. Paige begins collecting stories from other characters who have used Acme products and suffered consequences. Each story adds another piece to the puzzle. Some characters describe rockets that malfunctioned. Others remember traps that activated at the wrong time. Several report that Acme products behaved unpredictably, even when used exactly as instructed. Individually, each incident could be dismissed as a coincidence. Together, they suggest a pattern. Kevin realizes that the pattern could become the strongest evidence they have. If numerous cartoon characters have experienced similar failures, then Acme cannot simply claim that Wile is uniquely reckless. The problem may exist throughout the company's product line, but proving that the failures were connected to Project Sisyphus remains difficult. The company has hidden the program for years, and most of the people who know about it are either afraid to speak or have disappeared from the public eye. Dr. Law remains the most important missing piece. If they could find him and bring him to Washington, his testimony could transform the entire hearing. Paige becomes determined to learn what happened to Law. She thinks about Granny's story and the strange circumstances surrounding his disappearance. Law had not simply resigned from Acme, he had been silenced after objecting to Project Sisyphus. The portable hole used to imprison him was particularly disturbing because it demonstrated that Acme had turned one of its own cartoon technologies into a method of imprisonment. Paige wonders whether Law is still alive. If Acme had hidden him rather than killing him, perhaps there is still a chance to find him. But time is running out, and the hearing is approaching. Meanwhile, Buddy Crane receives instructions from Foghorn Leghorn. Acme's leadership is increasingly nervous about what might happen in Washington. The company has survived the lawsuit, but the congressional hearing represents a much greater threat. In court, Acme's lawyers could use procedural rules and objections to control what information the judge heard. In Congress, however, executives could be questioned publicly. If someone admits that Project Sisyphus existed, the consequences could be enormous. Foghorn therefore tells Buddy that the company's secrets must remain protected at all costs. Buddy proposes one final attempt to stop Kevin instead of simply fighting him in the hearing. Acme will try to make him doubt himself. If Kevin can be convinced that he has no chance of winning, perhaps he will accept another settlement or back away from the case. Buddy knows Kevin is not motivated by money. He is motivated by the desire to do what he believes is right. That makes him difficult to control through financial pressure, but it also gives Acme another weakness to exploit. If they can convince Kevin that while he does not deserve his support, they might be able to break the relationship between the lawyer and his client. As the group reaches Washington, the atmosphere is completely different from Albuquerque. The city is filled with reporters, government officials, lawyers, protesters, and cartoon characters interested in the Acme controversy. While he is fascinated by everything around him, but he remains focused on one thing. He wants to know where the Roadrunner is. Kevin repeatedly reminds him that they are there for the hearing. While he appears to agree, but his eyes continue searching for the familiar blue figure. The night before the hearing becomes one of the most important nights in the entire story. Kevin and Wiley are preparing for the next day's testimony. When Kevin finally confronts him about his obsession, Kevin has been trying to support Wiley from the beginning, but he has also become increasingly frustrated by the Coyote's behavior. He tells Wiley that the case is bigger than the Roadrunner. People have been hurt. Acme has potentially exploited cartoon characters for years. Dr. Law disappeared because he tried to stop the company. This is about justice, not another chase. While he refuses to accept that explanation completely, he believes the Roadrunner is connected to everything he has experienced. Danger. He goes looking for him. He finds Wiley in the middle of the confrontation with Tweety and attempts to intervene, but Kevin is not prepared for the chaos that follows. Tweety attacks while he tries to escape, and the surrounding environment becomes a series of impossible cartoon disasters. Kevin is eventually knocked unconscious. When he wakes, Wiley is gone. The separation leaves Kevin with an agonizing question. Has Acme succeeded in silencing his client before the hearing even begins? Kevin has spent the entire case believing that he could protect Wiley, but now he is alone in Washington with the hearing only hours away. His client is missing. Acme is preparing its defense, and Buddy Crane is about to make one final attempt to stop him. Buddy meets Kevin privately and offers him a deal. He tells Kevin that he can still walk away. The settlement will be generous. His law firm will be protected. His career will survive. He will no longer have to fight a corporation capable of destroying him professionally. Buddy presents the offer as a reasonable solution. After all, Kevin has already lost the original case. Why continue fighting? But Kevin refuses. Something has changed inside him. Earlier, Kevin was fighting because he wanted to help, while now he understands that the case represents something larger. He has seen what happens when powerful organizations believe nobody will challenge them. He has learned that Wiley's endless failures do not make him worthless. In fact, Wiley's willingness to continue after failure is precisely what makes him remarkable. Kevin walks away from Buddy's offer. The next morning, the congressional hearing begins. The room is packed. Senators, government officials, journalists, lawyers, Acme representatives, cartoon characters, and members of the public are all watching. Foghorn Leghorn is present as one of Acme's senior executives. Buddy Crane sits with the company's legal team, confident that they can survive the hearing just as they survived the trial. Kevin takes his place, carrying the evidence he has managed to gather. Paige is there as well, ready to support him. But one person is still missing: Wile Coyote. Kevin looks toward the entrance, hoping that his client will appear. The hearing begins without him. The chairman calls the proceedings to order, and the first questions are directed toward Acme Corporation. Foghorn presents the company's standard position. Acme is an innovative company. Its products are safe when used properly, and any accidents involving cartoon characters are unfortunate but unrelated incidents. Buddy carefully guides the testimony away from Project Sisyphus. Kevin listens silently. He knows that this may be his last chance, and somewhere outside the hearing room, Wile Coyote is still trying to find his way back. The truth about Acme is about to be revealed, but before that can happen, Kevin must convince Congress that Wile's story matters. And for the first time, Kevin is ready to fight for his client even if Wile is not there to fight beside him. The congressional hearing begins. Under an atmosphere of enormous tension, the room is crowded with lawmakers, reporters, lawyers, Acme representatives, and several cartoon characters who have come to see whether the company will finally be held responsible for the damage caused by its products. Kevin Avery sits at the table representing Wile Coyote, while Paige sits beside him, carefully organizing the documents they have collected. Across the room, Buddy Crane appears completely relaxed. He knows that Acme has survived the original lawsuit, and he believes the corporation can survive this hearing as well. Behind him sits Foghorn Leghorn, one of the company's most powerful executives, whose expression remains confident even though he knows the questions about Project Sisyphus could become dangerous. The hearing officially concerns Acme's product testing practices, but everyone understands that the real subject is whether the corporation deliberately used cartoon characters as test subjects. Kevin looks toward the entrance one more time, hoping to see Wile Coyote arrive, but the chairperson begins the proceedings without him. The first questions are directed toward Acme's public image and its responsibility toward consumers. Foghorn gives polished answers about safety, innovation, and corporate responsibility. He insists that Acme has always attempted to create useful products and that accidents happen when customers misuse complicated devices. Buddy carefully guides Foghorn through his testimony, making sure that nothing connects the company directly to Project Sisyphus. Whenever a question becomes uncomfortable, Buddy interrupts with a legal objection or asks for clarification. Kevin watches everything carefully. He knows that simply accusing Acme of wrongdoing will not be enough. He needs someone from inside the company to acknowledge what happened. He needs the truth to come from Acme itself. Paige whispers to Kevin that they should focus on the old records connected to Dr. Peter Law. She has spent hours studying the information they obtained from Bugs Bunny, Granny, and the former Acme employees. There are gaps in the records, but but the gaps themselves are suspicious. Law was once a respected scientist within Acme. Then, suddenly, his work disappeared from company records. His research was classified. His name became difficult to find, and eventually he vanished completely. Page believes that if they can force Foghorn to explain what happened to Law, they can establish a connection between his disappearance and Project Sisyphus. Kevin asks the first question about Law. Foghorn immediately becomes uncomfortable. He claims that Dr. Law was simply an employee who left the company many years ago. Kevin asks whether Law left voluntarily. Foghorn says he does not remember. Kevin asks whether Law worked on experimental product testing. Foghorn gives another vague answer, but he objects, arguing that Kevin is relying on unverified allegations. The chairman allows Kevin to continue but warns him that he needs evidence. Page quickly provides another document. It contains an old reference to Law's research. Kevin introduces it into the discussion and asks Foghorn whether the document is authentic. Foghorn attempts to dismiss it as an outdated internal document. Kevin then asks why a scientist working on product testing would disappear shortly after, raising ethical concerns. The room becomes quiet. Foghorn refuses to answer directly. At that moment, the hearing begins attracting even more attention from the press. Reporters realize that something is happening. They begin sending messages outside the building, and news organizations start reporting that Acme executives are being questioned about an alleged secret testing program. The story spreads rapidly. People watching from home begin discussing their own experiences with Acme products. Cartoon characters who once believed their injuries were isolated incidents start wondering whether they were also part of the same system. Kevin senses that public pressure may be their greatest weapon, but then Buddy Crane changes strategy. Instead of continuing to defend Acme quietly, he attacks Wile E. Coyote's credibility. He argues that the entire controversy has been built around one character who repeatedly purchased dangerous products for the purpose of catching the Roadrunner. Buddy shows images of Wile E.'s famous failures and points out how often the Coyote ignored obvious dangers. He suggests that Wile E. cannot reasonably blame Acme for injuries that resulted from his own reckless behavior. The argument receives laughter from some people in the room. Kevin does not laugh. He knows that this is exactly what Acme wants. They want everyone to remember Wile is the foolish Coyote who repeatedly destroys himself. They do not want anyone to think of him as a victim. Buddy is using the comedy of Wile E's life to hide the seriousness of what happened. Kevin stands and responds. He explains that the fact that Wile E is a cartoon character does not make his injuries meaningless. He points out that Acme knew its products were being used by cartoon characters and that the company had allegedly created an entire program designed around their unusual ability to survive physical harm. The room becomes quiet again. Kevin asks why a corporation would need such a program if its products were already safe. Buddy immediately objects. The chairman allows Kevin to continue only briefly. Kevin then says that Project Sisyphus is not a fantasy. He says there are witnesses who know about it and that Dr. Law tried to expose it before he disappeared. Buddy responds that Kevin has yet to produce Dr. Law himself. Without Law's testimony, Buddy argues the entire story depends on rumors. Kevin knows that Buddy has identified their biggest weakness. They do not know where Law is. The hearing temporarily moves to other questions, but the mystery remains. Kevin and Page exchange worried looks. They had hoped that the evidence they brought would be enough, but Acme's lawyers are skilled at creating doubt. Every document has an explanation. Every witness can be challenged. Every accusation can be described as speculation. Then Kevin receives unexpected information. A message reaches Page indicating that someone connected to Acme has been seen near the hearing. Page checks the information and realizes that it could be connected to Dr. Law. For a moment, she wonders whether the missing scientist may actually be alive. If Law is still somewhere under Acme's control, the corporation may have been hiding him all these years. Before they can investigate further, the hearing continues. The next witness is the Tasmanian Devil, Acme's head of public relations. He enters the room with his usual unpredictable energy, but the moment Kevin begins questioning him, his behavior changes. Kevin starts with harmless questions about Acme's advertising campaigns. Tasmanian Devil confirms that the company tests its products before selling them. Kevin then asks whether cartoon characters have ever participated in those tests. Tasmanian Devil hesitates. Kevin asks again. The witness refuses to answer clearly, but he objects. Kevin changes the question and asks whether Acme has ever collected data about cartoon physiology. Tasmanian Devil again avoids giving a direct response. Paige realizes that Kevin is getting close. The witness knows something. Kevin finally asks whether Project Sisyphus existed. For several seconds, Tasmanian Devil says nothing. That silence is more revealing than any answer. The room erupts with reactions. Reporters begin writing rapidly. Foghorn's expression changes, but he immediately stands and objects. He argues that Kevin is asking about a project that has not been established as legitimate evidence. The chairman asks Kevin to provide proof before continuing. Kevin presents the information from Bugs Bunny and the old references to law, but Buddy attacks the reliability of those sources. He argues that Bugs is a cartoon character with a personal interest in the controversy. He claims that the documents are incomplete and that there is no direct proof connecting them to Acme's current leadership. Kevin becomes frustrated. He knows the truth is there. He can feel it, but every path toward it is blocked by Acme's legal team. Meanwhile, outside the hearing, more cartoon characters begin gathering. They have heard the allegations and want to know whether Acme really used them as test subjects. Some remember being injured by Acme products. Others remember strange product demonstrations that they never understood at the time. A few even recall being asked to participate in experiments without being told what the experiments were for. The growing crowd creates enormous pressure. Foghorn realizes that the situation is becoming impossible to control. He quietly tells Buddy that the hearing must be ended before anyone reveals too much. Buddy understands. He makes his final move. He argues that the congressional hearing is being used as a substitute for a lawsuit that has already been dismissed. He claims that Kevin is attempting to relitigate a case that the courts have already rejected. He says that Wile E. Coyote has no sufficient evidence and that the allegations against Acme are damaging the company's reputation without legal justification. The chairman listens carefully. Kevin stands and argues that the government has every right to investigate potential corporate misconduct even if an individual civil lawsuit failed. He explains that the original case was dismissed because the evidence could not be admitted under courtroom rules, not because Project Sisyphus had been proven false. This distinction becomes extremely important. The chairman agrees that the allegations deserve further consideration. For the first time, Kevin feels that they may actually have a chance. But then another problem appears. The hearing schedule is almost over, and Wiley is still missing. Kevin desperately wants his client to be present because Wiley's personal experience is the heart of the entire story. Without him, Acme can continue portraying the controversy as an abstract argument about cartoon rights. Wiley is the living proof of what the products have done. Kevin asks whether the committee can postpone the hearing. The chairman refuses to make a decision immediately. Kevin leaves the table and tries to contact Paige. He asks whether anyone has located Wiley. Paige tells him that they still have no idea where he is. Kevin feels responsible. He remembers their argument the night before. He remembers telling Wiley that his obsession with the Roadrunner had destroyed his life. He remembers Wiley walking away hurt and angry. Kevin wonders whether he pushed his client too far. At the same time, Wiley is wandering through another part of Washington. After escaping Tweety, he has been trying to find Kevin. The encounter has left him shaken. For the first time, he has seen Acme's power directly. The company did not simply defend itself in court. It sent someone after him. While he begins to understand that the danger is real, he also begins thinking about Kevin's words. Maybe Kevin was right. Maybe the Roadrunner has become more than a rival. Maybe the chase has become a prison. While he remembers all the times the Roadrunner escaped, yet he also remembers the moments when the Roadrunner seemed to wait for him. There were times when the bird could have disappeared completely, but instead remained nearby, almost as if he wanted Wiley to continue chasing. Wiley begins wondering whether he has misunderstood their relationship for all these years. Back inside the hearing, Kevin receives another message. Buddy Crane wants to meet him privately. Kevin initially refuses, but Buddy insists. The two men meet in a hallway away from the cameras. Buddy makes one final offer. He tells Kevin that Acme is willing to give him everything he wants financially if he stops pursuing the allegations. Kevin asks whether the offer includes information about Dr. Law. Buddy says nothing. That silence confirms Kevin's suspicion. The corporation knows where Law is. Kevin realizes that Acme's greatest fear is not the lawsuit, it is Law. Buddy tells Kevin that he has a future if he walks away. He says that fighting Acme will destroy his career and possibly his law firm. Kevin asks Buddy whether he really believes Acme did nothing wrong. Buddy avoids the question. Kevin refuses the deal. He returns to the hearing room. Foghorn watches him carefully. The next phase begins with Kevin calling attention to the pattern of injuries suffered by cartoon characters. He describes how Acme products repeatedly malfunctioned in similar ways and how the company allegedly used those failures to improve its products. He explains that Project Sisyphus was built around a cruel assumption. Because cartoon characters could survive almost anything, their suffering did not matter. Kevin's voice becomes increasingly emotional. He says that surviving an injury does not mean an injury is harmless. The statement affects everyone in the room. Even some of the Acme representatives look uncomfortable. Kevin continues by describing Wile E. Coyote's history. He explains that Wile E. has failed again and again, yet every time he gets back up. Kevin says that determination should not be used as proof that someone cannot be harmed. In fact, repeated suffering may make the situation even more serious. The chairman listens closely. Then Foghorn Leghorn is asked to respond. For the first time, Foghorn loses some of his polished corporate confidence. He says that cartoon characters are different. He says they are not like humans. He argues that what happens to them cannot be judged by ordinary standards because they exist under different physical rules. Kevin immediately recognizes the danger in that argument. If Foghorn continues speaking, he may accidentally reveal exactly what Acme has been doing. Kevin asks one final question. If cartoon characters are different, why did Acme need to test its products on them? Foghorn pauses. The entire room waits. And at that exact moment, the doors at the back of the hearing room open. Everyone turns. A familiar figure stands there. Wile E. Coyote has finally arrived. Kevin looks at him in disbelief. But Wile E. is not alone in his thoughts. He has heard part of Kevin's speech from outside, and for the first time he understands that Kevin has been fighting for him even after their argument. The hearing is about to enter its most important stage, and this time, Wile E. is ready to tell his own story. Wile E. Coyote's arrival at the congressional hearing immediately changes the atmosphere inside the room. Only moments earlier, Kevin Avery had been struggling to keep the investigation alive without his client present, but now Wile E. is standing at the entrance, looking exhausted, battered, and completely different from the confident Coyote who had first walked into Kevin's law office. Everyone turns toward him, including the Acme representatives. Foghorn Leghorn's expression becomes tense, because he understands that Wile E.'s personal story could make the allegations against Acme much more powerful. Buddy Crane immediately begins whispering with the other members of the legal team, trying to determine how to prevent Wile E. from becoming the emotional center of the hearing. Kevin, however, is simply relieved to see him alive. The argument between them from the previous night suddenly feels less important. Kevin realizes that Wile E. has returned despite everything that happened, and that alone reminds him why he agreed to take this case in the first place. Wile E. walks slowly toward Kevin for several seconds. Neither of them says anything. Their relationship has been damaged by Kevin's angry words, but there is still an obvious connection between them. Kevin had accused Wile E. of allowing his obsession with the Roadrunner to control his life, and Wile E. had stormed away. Then Acme sent Tweety after him, nearly turning Wile E. into another victim of the company's secret operations. That experience has changed him. He has realized that Kevin was not completely wrong. His obsession with the Roadrunner has caused him to make terrible decisions, but it has also been the one thing that kept him moving forward through every failure. Wile E. finally approaches the table and takes his place beside Kevin. The chairman asks whether Wile E. is prepared to testify. Wile E. nods. There is no dramatic speech at first. He simply looks around the room and then looks toward the Acme representatives. For perhaps the first time in his life, Wile E. is not standing in front of the Roadrunner with a trap in his hands. He is not preparing an explosion or calculating the trajectory of a rocket. He is standing in a government hearing, surrounded by people who have the power to determine whether Acme will be held accountable. Kevin quietly tells him that he does not have to prove everything alone, while he looks at him and gives a small expression of understanding. The two have reconciled without needing a long explanation. Kevin begins by asking Wally about his history with Acme products. Wally describes years of purchasing devices that promised to help him catch the Roadrunner. Every time he believed he had found the perfect solution, something went wrong. The products failed, malfunctioned, exploded, or produced results that were completely different from what he expected. The room listens as Kevin presents the events not as comedy but as a pattern. Wally has spent years being the punchline, but now each failure becomes evidence of a possible corporate problem. Buddy Crane attempts to challenge Wally's testimony by emphasizing his obsession with the Roadrunner. He asks whether Wally knowingly purchased products designed for dangerous situations. Wally acknowledges that he used the products to pursue the Roadrunner. Buddy then asks whether Wally ever read warnings or instructions. Wally gives another reluctant acknowledgement. Buddy believes he has found the weakness he needs. If Wally knowingly placed himself in dangerous situations, then Acme could argue that the responsibility belonged to him. But Kevin changes the direction of the questioning. He asks Wally whether the products ever performed as advertised. Wally shakes his head. Kevin asks whether the failures happened once or repeatedly. Wally indicates that they happened again and again. Kevin then asks whether Wally ever had an Acme product behave normally when he was simply testing it. Again, Wally's answer suggests that something was consistently wrong. The issue is no longer whether Wally used dangerous products. The issue is why Acme repeatedly sold products that failed in predictable ways. The committee members begin asking questions of their own. They want to understand whether cartoon characters were aware that Acme was testing products on them. Wally has no knowledge of Project Sisyphus at first. He had always assumed that his failures were simply the result of bad luck, poor planning, or the Roadrunner's extraordinary speed. That realization is painful. If Acme really had been collecting information from his injuries, then the company had been watching him suffer while he continued buying its products. Kevin explains that this is exactly why Dr. Peter Law's story matters. Law was one of the scientists who understood the system from the inside. He discovered that Acme's testing program used cartoon characters because they could withstand extreme physical punishment. Law objected because he believed their ability to survive did not give Acme permission to hurt them. When he attempted to expose the program, he disappeared. The committee then turns its attention to Foghorn Leghorn. Foghorn is asked whether Project Sisyphus existed. He initially refuses to answer directly. He describes it as an old research initiative and claims that the program was misunderstood. Kevin immediately asks whether cartoon characters were used during the testing. Foghorn says that Acme had conducted research involving cartoon physiology, but he insists that the company never intended to harm anyone. He argues that cartoon characters are unusually resilient and that the experiments were designed to improve product safety. Kevin asks the obvious question: if the experiments were designed to improve safety, why were they kept secret? Foghorn becomes defensive. He says that corporate research is often confidential. Kevin asks why Dr. Law disappeared after objecting to the program. Foghorn claims that Law left the company. Kevin asks whether Acme knows where he is. Foghorn refuses to answer. The hearing becomes increasingly tense. Reporters are writing constantly. Cameras are focused on Foghorn. Outside the building, the story is spreading rapidly. People are beginning to understand that Project Sisyphus may not be an imaginary conspiracy. An Acme executive is refusing to explain why a scientist who supposedly left the company vanished under mysterious circumstances. Buddy tries to regain control by arguing that the committee is relying too heavily on emotional testimony. He says Wally's suffering is unfortunate, but the government cannot punish a company simply because a cartoon character has repeatedly injured himself. Buddy insists that Acme has sold millions of products and that most customers have never experienced serious problems. He attempts to portray Wally as an unusual customer whose extreme behavior should not be used to judge the entire company. Kevin responds that this is precisely why the secret testing program matters. If Acme used cartoon characters as experimental subjects, then the company cannot hide behind the argument that Wiley was simply reckless. According to Kevin, Acme knew that its products behaved unpredictably under certain circumstances and used cartoon characters to study those failures before selling products to humans. The company allegedly turned the suffering of cartoons into a business advantage. The committee asks Foghorn whether this is true. Foghorn finally makes a statement that shocks the room. He admits that Acme conducted experiments involving cartoon characters, but instead of expressing regret, he tries to justify them. He explains that cartoons are fundamentally different from humans. They can survive impossible falls, explosions, crushing impacts, and other injuries. According to Foghorn, this made them uniquely suitable for testing products. He argues that Acme was not hurting them in any meaningful sense because they always recovered. Kevin is stunned by the argument. Wally looks toward Foghorn. For Wally, the statement is deeply insulting. The company has spent years treating his suffering as meaningless, simply because he was able to stand up afterward. Kevin turns to the committee and explains that survival does not erase harm. Just because someone can recover from an injury does not mean they consented to being injured. Foghorn insists that Acme's research ultimately benefited ordinary consumers. He argues that the testing prevented dangerous products from reaching humans, and that the company should be praised for using a unique testing environment to improve safety. The committee members are not convinced. Then Kevin asks about Dr. Law. Foghorn becomes silent. Kevin asks whether Law objected to Project Sisyphus. Foghorn admits that there were disagreements. Kevin asks whether Law attempted to expose the program. Foghorn refuses to answer. Kevin asks whether Acme knows where Law is today. Foghorn again refuses to answer. The refusal becomes its own kind of evidence. At this point, Kevin realizes that he needs something more powerful than documents or accusations. He needs a witness who can confirm the human consequences of Acme's actions. But before he can make another move, Buddy Crane requests a break. The committee agrees. During the recess, Kevin and Paige speak privately with Wall. Paige tells him that his testimony was extremely important. While he appears uncertain, he has spent his entire life trying to catch the Roadrunner, and now he has been forced to confront a much larger truth about his existence. Kevin tells him that he is proud of him. Wiley looks at Kevin with an expression suggesting that the apology he could not give earlier is finally being communicated without words. The break also gives Acme an opportunity to regroup. Foghorn is furious with Buddy. He believes the lawyer allowed Kevin to get too close to the truth. Buddy insists that they can still control the situation. He points out that Foghorn has not directly admitted to imprisoning Law or deliberately harming anyone, as long as they can prevent the government from connecting Project Sisyphus to intentional misconduct. Acme may still survive, but Buddy has underestimated the power of public opinion. Outside the hearing room, reporters are interviewing cartoon characters who have experienced Acme accidents. One after another, they describe incidents that seemed funny when they happened but now appear disturbing in context. Characters who once laughed at their own injuries are beginning to wonder whether those injuries were deliberately recorded and studied. The story is becoming larger than Wile E. Coyote. Back inside, the hearing resumes. Kevin asks whether Acme maintained records of its experiments. Foghorn says that records existed but suggests that many were lost or destroyed over the years. Paige immediately recognizes the importance of this answer. If records were destroyed after the investigation began, that could indicate an attempt to conceal evidence. She quietly tells Kevin that they should ask whether Acme has a document retention policy. Kevin does exactly that. Foghorn becomes increasingly uncomfortable. He explains that old records are routinely removed for administrative reasons. Kevin asks whether Project Sisyphus records were among them. Foghorn says he cannot confirm. Paige then produces another document that suggests Acme maintained extensive records related to cartoon testing. The document includes references to injury data, product performance, and repeated exposure tests. The committee members examine it carefully. Buddy objects again, but this time the objection does not stop the discussion. The committee wants answers. Kevin asks whether Acme collected data on Wile E. Coyote specifically. Foghorn does not answer. Kevin asks again. Still no answer. Wally looks toward Foghorn. For the first time, the Coyote realizes that his entire history may have been recorded by the corporation. Every explosion could have been measured. Every failed trap could have generated data. Every injury could have become another entry in a scientific report. While he becomes visibly emotional, Kevin places a hand near him, reassuring him without interrupting the hearing. Then a new development occurs. The committee receives information that someone connected to Dr. Law may have located evidence proving that the scientist is still alive. The room reacts immediately. If Law is alive, his testimony could destroy Acme's defense. Foghorn's expression changes completely, but he tells him to remain calm. Kevin asks where Law is. Nobody answers. The committee chair announces that investigators will attempt to locate the missing scientist and determine whether he can testify. For Acme, the situation has become a crisis. For Kevin, it may finally be the breakthrough they have been waiting for. But while he has something else on his mind, he keeps looking toward the hallway. Kevin asks him what he is doing, while he points toward the corridor. A familiar sound can be heard in the distance. A rapid series of footsteps. A blur of blue appears beyond the doors. The Roadrunner has arrived. While his eyes widen, for a moment, everything else disappears from his mind. The government hearing, Project Sisyphus, Acme Corporation, Kevin, Page, and the entire legal battle become distant. The Roadrunner is standing only a short distance away, after years of chasing him across deserts and highways. While he finally has the chance to face him in a place where running away may no longer be the only option. But this time, something is different. The Roadrunner does not immediately run. Instead, he looks directly at Wile-E, and for the first time, Wile-E begins to wonder whether the Roadrunner has something to say. The arrival of the Roadrunner creates a moment that nobody in the congressional hearing expected. For years, Wile-E Coyote has chased this bird across deserts, roads, cliffs, mountains, and countless impossible landscapes, always believing that one day he would finally catch him. Yet now the Roadrunner is standing inside a government building, surrounded by lawyers, politicians, reporters, and representatives of Acme Corporation. More importantly, he is not immediately running away. Wile-E stares at him from across the room, and the expression on his face is completely different from the excitement he normally shows when he sees his rival. There is confusion, surprise, and something almost emotional. Kevin Avery notices the change immediately. He realizes that whatever happens next may finally reveal the truth about the relationship between these two characters. The chairman asks whether the Roadrunner is willing to testify. For a moment, there is no response. The Roadrunner has always been famous for communicating without long conversations, and his presence alone has often been enough to create chaos. But this time, he has come voluntarily. He moves toward the witness area and prepares to speak. The room becomes unusually quiet. Even Buddy Crane looks uncertain because Acme's legal team had prepared for Wile-E's testimony, but they had not expected the Roadrunner to become an important witness. Kevin approaches the Roadrunner carefully. He does not want to turn the testimony into another chase. Instead, he asks whether the Roadrunner has witnessed Wile-E using Acme products over the years. The Roadrunner confirms that he has. Kevin asks whether he has seen those products fail. Again, the answer is yes. Kevin then asks whether Wile-E was ever seriously harmed by the products. The Roadrunner acknowledges that he was. The testimony is simple, but its emotional power is enormous because the Roadrunner has witnessed almost the entire history of Wile-E's suffering. Buddy immediately attempts to challenge the testimony. He argues that the Roadrunner is not an objective witness because he is the person Wile-E was constantly trying to catch. Buddy suggests that the Roadrunner benefited from Wile-E's failures and therefore cannot be considered neutral. The argument initially seems convincing, but Kevin points out that the Roadrunner has no financial interest in the lawsuit. He is not seeking compensation from Acme. He is not asking for money or control over the company. He simply wants to explain what he has witnessed. The committee allows the testimony to continue. The Roadrunner begins describing the chase from his perspective. For years, he has watched Wile-E build elaborate plans using Acme products. He has seen rockets launch, traps collapse, explosives detonate, and machines malfunction. He has watched Wile-E fall from enormous heights and somehow survive. But according to the Roadrunner, surviving did not mean that the experiences were harmless. He remembers seeing Wiley exhausted, frustrated, and defeated after each failed attempt. Sometimes the Roadrunner could have simply disappeared into the distance, but he stayed nearby because he understood that Wiley would eventually return. This surprises Wiley. He has always believed that the Roadrunner was mocking him. Every time the bird escaped, Wiley assumed that the Roadrunner was laughing at him. But now the Roadrunner's testimony suggests something different. He did not hate Wiley, he did not necessarily want him to suffer. In fact, he had developed a strange friendship with the Coyote despite being his lifelong target. Kevin asks the Roadrunner whether he considers Wiley a friend. The answer is yes. Wiley becomes visibly emotional. For decades, he has thought of the Roadrunner as an enemy, but the bird has apparently seen their relationship differently. Their endless chase was not simply a battle between hunter and prey. It was a strange form of companionship. The Roadrunner always knew Wiley would return, and Wiley always knew the Roadrunner would be there. Their lives had become connected through repetition. The Roadrunner then explains something even more important. He says that he misses Wiley when they are apart. The statement completely changes Wiley's perspective. The Coyote has spent years believing that catching the Roadrunner would finally make him happy. But if the Roadrunner genuinely considers him a friend, then catching him might actually destroy the relationship that has defined both of their lives. Wiley begins thinking about all the moments he has ignored because he was focused exclusively on winning. He remembers the times when the Roadrunner could have disappeared forever but instead waited for him. He remembers how the bird would sometimes look back before speeding away. What Wiley interpreted as teasing may have been an invitation to continue their unusual friendship. Kevin watches Wiley's reaction and realizes that this is the emotional turning point he has been hoping for. The case against Acme is important, but the deeper story is about Wiley finally understanding that his life is more than his obsession. But he tries to redirect the hearing toward Wiley's responsibility. He asks the Roadrunner whether Wiley ever stopped chasing him. The answer is obviously no. But he asks whether Wiley repeatedly purchased Acme products voluntarily. Again, yes. But he asks whether Wiley understood that the products could be dangerous. The Roadrunner cannot completely deny it, but he smiles because he believes he has weakened the case. But then Kevin asks one simple question. Did Wiley ever know that Acme was using him as a test subject? The Roadrunner says no. That answer destroys one of Acme's strongest arguments. Wiley may have knowingly purchased dangerous products, but he never agreed to participate in secret experiments. He never consented to having his injuries recorded and analyzed. He never knew that his suffering could be used to improve products for human customers. The committee members begin focusing on Acme again. Kevin asks Foghorn whether the Roadrunner's testimony is accurate. Foghorn claims that the testing program was not designed to hurt anyone. Kevin asks whether Wiley was ever informed about Project Sisyphus. Foghorn says he does not know. Kevin asks whether consent was obtained. Foghorn becomes silent. The committee chair asks Foghorn directly whether Acme obtained permission from the cartoon characters used in its experiments. Foghorn attempts to explain that ordinary human consent rules were not necessarily applicable to cartoon beings. This answer causes immediate outrage. Several people in the room react strongly. The idea that cartoon characters could be denied basic rights simply because they were physically different from humans makes Acme's defense appear increasingly disturbing. Kevin then makes the central argument of the hearing. He explains that Project Sisyphus was based on the assumption that cartoon characters did not deserve the same consideration as humans because they could survive physical harm, but resilience is not consent. The fact that Wiley could survive an explosion did not mean Acme had the right to expose him to that explosion without his knowledge. The fact that he could recover from being crushed did not mean the company could treat him as laboratory equipment. The committee members listen carefully. Foghorn becomes increasingly defensive. He argues that Acme's research ultimately benefited everyone. He claims that products became safer because of the information gathered from cartoon testing. He insists that the program was necessary for technological development and that the company never intended to cause permanent harm. Kevin asks him whether that justification would be acceptable if the test subjects were humans. Foghorn cannot answer. Kevin then asks whether Acme would have informed human customers that their bodies were being used for experiments. Foghorn again remains silent. The room understands the implication. The company treated cartoon characters differently because it believed their suffering did not matter. At this point, the hearing begins moving beyond Wiley's lawsuit. The committee starts discussing whether cartoon characters should have legal protections against corporations. Several lawmakers suggest that the Acme controversy may expose a larger problem within the world where humans and cartoons live together. If corporations can legally exploit cartoon characters simply because they have unusual physical abilities, then thousands of other characters may have been subjected to similar treatment. Kevin's speech becomes more passionate. He explains that while he did not come to court because he wanted to become famous, he came because he wanted someone to acknowledge that what happened to him mattered. He had spent his entire life failing, getting hurt, recovering, and trying again. The world laughed at him, but he never stopped. Kevin says that his determination is not evidence that he was never harmed. It is evidence of how much he was willing to endure. While he listens quietly, the words affect him deeply. For most of his life, he believed that the only thing that mattered was catching the road runner. He now realizes that he has spent years measuring his worth by whether he could succeed at one impossible goal. Every failure made him believe he needed to try again. He never stopped to ask whether he actually wanted to win or whether the chase itself had become the most important part of his life. Then the road runner looks toward him. There is no mockery in his expression. There is no challenge. There is simply recognition. While he finally understands, he does not need to catch the road runner. He needs to decide what kind of relationship they will have. The committee then turns its attention back to Foghorn. Kevin asks whether Acme has records proving the existence of Project Sisyphus. Foghorn refuses to answer. The chairman warns him that refusing to cooperate could lead to further legal consequences. Foghorn finally admits that records existed. Kevin asks where those records are. Foghorn says some were destroyed. The room erupts again. Page immediately realizes the importance of the admission. Destroying records related to a federal investigation could become a -1 legal problem for Acme. Kevin asks whether Foghorn authorized the destruction. Foghorn says he cannot remember. Kevin asks whether Buddy Crane knew about it. Buddy immediately objects. The chairman allows the question but asks Kevin to provide evidence before making an accusation. Kevin looks toward Paige. She produces another document. It contains communications between Acme executives regarding the preservation of Project Sisyphus records. The document suggests that the company knew the investigation was approaching and discussed removing sensitive material. Buddy's confidence begins to disappear. For the first time, Acme's legal team realizes that the hearing may no longer be controllable. Kevin has connected several pieces of the puzzle. Dr. Law's disappearance, Project Sisyphus, cartoon testing, Acme's repeated product failures, the destruction of records, and the company's attempts to silence critics. But one major piece is still missing. Dr. Peter Law himself. The committee chairman announces that federal investigators will immediately search for information about Law's whereabouts. If the scientist can be located, he may be able to provide direct testimony about the origins of Project Sisyphus and the circumstances surrounding his disappearance. While he turns toward Kevin, the two share a quiet moment. The case has become bigger than either of them imagined. Then while he notices the road runner preparing to leave, for a moment, the old instinct returns. He looks ready to chase him, but then he stops. The road runner looks back, while he smiles. Instead of chasing him immediately, while he simply lets him go. The decision seems small, but it represents a major change. While he is finally choosing the decision seems small, but it represents a major change. While he is finally choosing the road runner's friendship over his obsession with catching him, the road runner disappears down the hallway. While he remains where he is, Kevin watches him with surprise. For years, Kevin believed Wiley would never change. Now he sees that perhaps the Coyote has finally learned the most important lesson of all. Winning is not always about catching the person running away from you. Sometimes, winning means understanding why you were chasing them in the first place. But the hearing is not finished. Foghorn Leghorn still has one last argument to make. He turns toward the committee and claims that even if Project Sisyphus existed, cartoon characters are not important enough for the government to spend its resources protecting them. The statement creates an uncomfortable silence. Kevin looks at Wally. Wally looks toward the Roadrunner's empty path. And then Kevin stands. He is ready to deliver the speech that could determine Acme's fate. The congressional hearing reaches its most important stage when Foghorn Leghorn makes the argument that ultimately exposes just how deeply Acme Corporation has misunderstood the people it has been exploiting. According to Foghorn, even if Project Sisyphus existed, the government should not treat the suffering of cartoon characters as seriously as it would treat the suffering of humans. He presents the argument as if it were completely logical. Cartoon characters can survive explosions, falls, crushing machines, and impossible accidents, so in his mind, their injuries are not truly comparable to human injuries. To Foghorn, characters like Wall E. Coyote are almost indestructible, resources that can be used for testing without serious consequences. But the statement produces exactly the opposite effect from what he intended. The room becomes silent, and Kevin Avery realizes that Foghorn has finally said aloud what Acme's entire system was built upon. The corporation never believed cartoon characters deserved the same protection as everyone else. It believed their ability to survive made them less important. Kevin slowly stands and begins responding to Foghorn's argument. He does not shout, because he no longer needs to. The evidence and testimony have already changed the mood of the hearing. Instead, Kevin speaks about Wile E. Coyote as an individual. He reminds the committee that Wile E. has a mind, emotions, hopes, frustrations, fears, and relationships. He has spent years recovering from Acme's products, and the fact that he can survive does not mean that what happened to him should be ignored. Kevin explains that resilience should never be confused with permission. If a person can survive something, that does not give another person or corporation the right to repeatedly inflict it upon them. The same principle should apply to cartoon characters. Their unusual biology does not make their lives worthless. Kevin then turns to Wile and asks him to stand. Wile rises slowly. The room watches him. For decades, audiences have seen him as a comic figure who fails over and over again. But now, standing in front of government officials, he looks less like a joke and more like someone who has finally been given the opportunity to tell his story. Kevin asks Wile whether he ever agreed to participate in Acme's experiments. Wile shakes his head. Kevin asks whether he knew that Acme might be collecting data from his injuries. Again, Wile says no. Kevin asks whether he believed the products he purchased were ordinary, commercial products. Wile confirms that he did. These simple answers make the situation much clearer. Wile was not volunteering for an experiment. He was a customer who trusted a company and repeatedly suffered because of its products. Buddy Crane tries to interrupt, arguing that the entire argument is based on emotional manipulation. But the committee has heard enough. The hearing is no longer about whether Wile used Acme products recklessly. It is about whether Acme deliberately created a system in which cartoon characters were exploited without their knowledge. The distinction is enormous. Even if Wile was reckless, that would not excuse Acme from responsibility for secretly using his suffering for scientific research. The Roadrunner's earlier testimony becomes even more important. He had witnessed Wile's repeated injuries and confirmed that, while he did not know about Project Sisyphus, he had also explained that despite the endless chase, he considered Wile a friend. This revelation continues to affect Wile throughout the hearing. For the first time, he understands that his relationship with the Roadrunner was never as simple as he imagined. The chase was not purely hatred or competition. It had become a strange routine that connected their lives. Wile had spent years thinking that the Roadrunner's escape was a personal insult, but perhaps the bird had simply been continuing a game that both of them had unknowingly agreed to play. Kevin now focuses entirely on Acme's leadership. He asks Foghorn whether he believes cartoon characters deserve legal protection. Foghorn tries to avoid the question, but the committee insists. Eventually, he argues that the unique nature of cartoon characters makes ordinary rules difficult to apply. Kevin responds that the law exists precisely because powerful organizations will always find reasons to treat some groups differently. If Acme can decide that cartoon characters are less important because they are difficult to permanently injure. Then another corporation could use the same logic against another group of beings. The issue is not whether cartoons are physically identical to humans. The issue is whether they deserve to be treated as living beings with rights. The statement receives a strong reaction from the room. Several lawmakers appear to agree. The public response outside the hearing becomes even stronger. Cartoon characters who have experienced Acme accidents begin publicly demanding investigations. Human consumers also begin questioning the company. If Acme was willing to hide dangerous experiments from cartoon characters, what else might the company have hidden from its human customers? Buddy recognizes that the situation is slipping away. He makes another attempt to defend the corporation. He argues that Project Sisyphus, if it existed, was an old program and that current Acme leadership should not be blamed for actions that occurred decades earlier. Kevin immediately challenges this argument by pointing out that Acme's current executives have spent years hiding information about the program. The problem is not simply what happened in 1992. The problem is that the corporation continued concealing it into the present. Page then introduces evidence suggesting that Acme executives discussed protecting the company's reputation and preventing information about Project Sisyphus from becoming public. The documents show that the organization was aware of the controversy and took steps to contain it. This gives the committee a much stronger basis for investigating the company. Foghorn becomes increasingly nervous. He realizes that the hearing may result in a full federal investigation. Buddy tries to reassure him, but even he knows that the corporation has lost control of the narrative. The public no longer sees Acme as a harmless company selling ridiculous cartoon gadgets. They see a powerful organization that may have exploited vulnerable beings for years. Then the chairman asks the most important question of the day. Where is Dr. Peter Law? Nobody has a satisfactory answer. Foghorn claims that Law left the company decades ago. Kevin reminds the committee that Law's wife said he disappeared after objecting to Project Sisyphus. Bugs Bunny's information suggests that Law attempted to expose the project before he vanished, and now there are indications that Law may still be alive. The committee announces that federal investigators will search for him. The announcement terrifies Acme. Foghorn understands that if Law is found, the entire corporate story could collapse. Law can explain how Project Sisyphus was created, who authorized it, why cartoon characters were selected as test subjects, and what happened after he attempted to expose the program. More importantly, he can explain what Acme did to him. Buddy quietly tells Foghorn that they need to leave the building. But before they can make their move, investigators enter. The situation becomes chaotic. Acme representatives attempt to communicate with one another, while reporters rush toward the exits. The hearing is temporarily suspended as investigators begin collecting documents and questioning employees. Foghorn and Buddy realize that, while he makes a small gesture suggesting that he understands now, he does not need to catch him. The Roadrunner responds in his own way, and for a moment the two share an unexpectedly emotional exchange. Their relationship has survived everything: explosions, traps, cliffs, rockets, and years of endless pursuit. While he finally understands that the Roadrunner was never simply his enemy, he was his companion in a strange, lifelong game. The moment does not last forever. The Roadrunner eventually turns and prepares to leave. Wally lets him go, but before the Roadrunner disappears completely, Wally notices something that looks strangely familiar: a trail, a carefully constructed sequence of objects, a mechanism. Wally's eyes widen. He realizes that he had built a trap before the hearing. It was one of his most complicated Rube Goldberg-style creations. He had originally designed it to catch the Roadrunner. The trap stretches across the area in an elaborate chain reaction. One object triggers another, which activates another mechanism, which moves another object, creating an enormous sequence of ridiculous but precise events. Wally had prepared it long before he began changing his perspective on the Roadrunner. Now he faces a decision. Should he activate it? Kevin sees the mechanism and immediately understands what Wily has created. Page also recognizes the opportunity. The trap was originally designed to catch the Roadrunner, but it could now be used for something else. Kevin suggests that they activate it. Wally hesitates. Then he smiles. The mechanism begins. One small movement triggers another. A ball rolls down a track. It knocks into a lever. The lever releases another object. That object activates a spring. The spring sends a projectile into the air. The projectile lands on another mechanism. The chain reaction becomes increasingly elaborate. Acme executives watch in horror as their own products become part of the ridiculous sequence. The trap is not dangerous in the way Wall-E's old traps were dangerous. Instead, it becomes a spectacular demonstration of the absurdity that has defined his entire relationship with Acme. The final sequence humiliates the Acme team, the corporation that spent years believing it controlled cartoon characters is defeated by the very kind of elaborate cartoon logic it once exploited. While he does not actually need to catch the Roadrunner, the point of the trap is no longer victory over his rival, it is closure. For perhaps the first time, while he can enjoy the chase without being consumed by it. Back in Albuquerque, the consequences of the hearing begin spreading rapidly. Kevin's small law firm becomes unexpectedly famous. Cartoon characters from across the country begin contacting Avery, Jones, and Maltese. They have stories of their own. They have been injured by Acme products, manipulated by the corporation, or used in strange experiments without their knowledge. Some want compensation. Others simply want someone to listen. Kevin's office becomes overwhelmed. Paige is suddenly busier than ever. What began as a single lawsuit has become a movement. More information also begins coming from Bugs. Bunny, the whistleblower, continues leaking documents connected to Project Sisyphus. The new evidence reveals that the program was much larger than anyone originally suspected. Acme had maintained extensive records about cartoon subjects, product failures, and testing results. The information eventually becomes impossible for the government to ignore. A full federal investigation is launched. Investigators begin searching Acme facilities and questioning employees. They uncover evidence connecting senior executives to the secret program. The investigation also reveals that the company attempted to conceal records and silence people who knew too much. Eventually, arrests are made. Foghorn Leghorn is taken into custody. Buddy Crane is also arrested for his involvement in the cover-up. The once powerful Acme executives, who believed they could control the situation, are now facing the consequences of their actions. But the story does not end with the arrests. Investigators finally locate Dr. Peter Laurent. That brings us to the end of our complete story, explanation, and review of Coyote vs. Acme. What started as Coyote's never-ending mission to catch the Roadrunner turns into something much bigger, a fight for justice against a powerful corporation that has secretly taken advantage of cartoon characters for years. Throughout the movie, we see Wall-E facing not only Acme's dangerous products, but also his own obsession and failures. His journey teaches us that failure does not make someone weak, and sometimes the most important victory is learning to let go of an obsession and understand what truly matters. The movie also gives us a completely different perspective on the relationship between Wall-E Coyote and the Roadrunner. What once looked like an endless rivalry slowly reveals itself as a strange friendship that has survived countless chases and disasters, from the courtroom battles to the shocking Project Sisyphus revelation and the final confrontation with Acme. The movie combines comedy, adventure, emotion, and an important message about responsibility and determination. If you enjoyed this full movie explanation and review, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more movie stories, explanations, and reviews. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.